Section 3. You will hear a student called Tim discussing his dissertation proposal with his tutor. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Have you had any ideas about your dissertation proposal, Tim?
I'm definitely doing something about saving dying languages, languages that are in danger of becoming extinct.
Sounds like an interesting idea. How are you going to focus your project?
Well, my grandmother's first language is spoken by only a handful of people now, so I'd like to record an interview with her that can be kept in an archive, which she was really keen to do when I asked her about it. I know there are linguists already working on recording dying languages, and when we focused on that in class, I realised I wanted to do something for my grandmother's heritage. I wanted to discuss with you how to go about it.
You'd have to think carefully about what to include, of course. Something about the impact of technology, perhaps.
You mean the fact that technology allows people to communicate at the click of a mouse across the world, so it contributes to languages becoming endangered?
Mm-hmm.
I know this has resulted in lots of languages disappearing because people use international languages like English to communicate instead of their own. That's why it's important to make an effort to conserve them.
So, in your introduction, you could talk about the negative impact of globalization on minority languages.
Right, I'll mention that. And the media's had an enormous impact. Schools teach in the standard languages of a country rather than minority ones. That means young people lose the language skills of earlier generations because they aren't exposed to them as they would have been in the past. I'll definitely put that in.
Good idea.
I mean, take me for instance. I'm not a fluent speaker of my grandmother's first language, so most of the time we speak in English.
Well, exactly. And then what are you going to say about how we can actually save dying languages?
Well, I realise that there are organisations working to conserve them by creating libraries of audio and video material that document and conserve languages for future generations. That's what I'd like to contribute to. Though I doubt whether it's possible to save my grandmother's language. There are so few people who speak it, I can't see why anyone would try to revive it. I don't think it's going to become anyone's first language again. Though if I do this, at least there will be a record of it.
And it may be that recording minority languages can save some of them from dying out.
I don't get how, if no one's learning them as their first language.
Well, the data that's collected isn't just stored away and forgotten about until someone rediscovers it in the future. It can be used to develop teaching materials within communities, so local children have learning tools they've never had access to before. You know, they can listen to and see these languages written down.
Oh, right. I've also heard something about recording oral literature. What does that mean? Is it to do with how languages and culture are bound together?
Exactly. Team members from the organisations we're talking about travel to remote communities and record their stories, rituals, songs.
So it's not just language that's conserved. I see. It's like some of the traditions in my family that have come from my grandmother's community. It's important to me to keep those alive too. Hopefully I'll have my own grandchildren to pass them down to. And even if my grandmother's language itself doesn't survive, then at least some of the history and culture will.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen carefully and answer questions 27 to 30.
So, talk me through your plan concerning interviewing and recording your grandmother.
I want it to be useful. I'm not sure what I should be asking her to talk about that's going to get the best language samples.
Well, let's discuss a few options. You don't really need to look at what linguists have already done in terms of translating your grandmother's language into English. As you speak the language, to a certain extent, it would be better for you not to use English. You want to collect samples of her speaking in her first language, rather than asking her to translate things.
So, once I've got some recordings, should I concentrate on looking at grammatical forms?
Well, not necessarily. A better approach would be to focus on certain words, especially those for things which people don't use anymore, like in the home or on a farm. One way would be to get her to recount tales from her childhood. If you ask someone for a word, they might not remember it, but it might pop out in a sentence if they're focused on something that brings up the word naturally.
Like, my grandmother might not remember a particular saying in her first language, but if I ask her to talk about her life, it might come up naturally in context.
Exactly. Childhood's a good topic. Everyone has lots of memories they can talk about. And you'll get much more authentic samples if you get her talking rather than asking her to write things down or translate them. You will, of course, have to produce a written version eventually yourself, but that's quite different.
Okay.
Now, what about the practicalities of doing the recording?
I thought I'd do a few shorter meetings rather than one long one. I read something about that giving me some time to think about what we've spoken about, and then I'll have a chance to clarify stuff afterwards.
Good, yes. Let the audio run and listen to it the same day. If you leave too long between recording and listening, there might be some things you don't remember properly. It's not necessary to make a written record of it straight away, though.
Right. Do you think it might help to say when and where we did the interviews?
Without doubt. But keep it small scale so it's easier to manage. Covering as much as you can seems like a good idea. It could lead to confusion, though.
Yes, I get that.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now look at section 4.